The crunching of a tacky on that microphone.
Great. Love that.
Guten Tag, and welcome to Expected on Tours. I'm your host, Eric Morgan.
And I'm your host, Evan Davis. First of all, today was our first live stream, our live watch-along for the U.S. women's national team on YouTube for our Patreon members. And there's maybe like 10 or 11 of you hanging out, and can't thank you enough for hanging out with us. It was a lot of fun. We were doing a lot of things on the fly that we've never done before, but I think it went well.
And if it didn't go well, it couldn't have been worse than Foudy and Champion.
No, although it doesn't seem like they were out of pocket as much as they were during the Zambia game.
No, I'm kidding, of course. And frankly, John Champion and Julie Foudy is nowhere near as bad as it gets in a booth. Not even close. True. Speaking of not as bad as it gets, 4-1.
4-1 USA over Germany.
I'd even say pretty good. Pretty good.
Maybe not the game that the scoreline would reflect necessarily.
Second time that's happened in this group stage.
Indeed. But at the same time, I think the U.S. can be very, very happy with, I would say, 3 of the 4 goals. I mean, they're going to be happy with all 4, but in terms of like the actually quality of the chances, 3 of those 4 goals I think were really stellar and came about as the exact result of what the U.S. is trying to produce in attack. But more broadly, this was a game that did not unfold the way that I had anticipated it would, really, at all.
Nope. You've been carrying the flag for the Germans on this one and expected a tight, tense little number. Which, frankly, I didn't expect Germany to win, but I expected a tight, tense little number, so I'll own the same own goal as Evan here. Instead, what we got is what we all hope to get when you get a goal early in a game. A big, open, pretty chaotic at times.
Quite chaotic, yeah.
It kind of was like rolling back the clock and watching a U.S. team pre-Emma Hayes in the sense that it was just a lot of transition.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of control.
Well, a lot of attempts at control, which I think was interesting. And there were some tactical rubs that Hayes made that also I didn't quite see coming that I think directly contributed to that shape of the chaos, which we can get into. But broadly, 4-1 scoreline, 1.2 to 0.8 on the XG, which may be actually a little low based on some of the chances. We think that maybe a couple of those goals were probably higher probability chances than what Opta's giving us. But also, Opta's been a little nuts today. At one point, they actually said that Zambia had a negative XG.
Wow.
This was after they had scored like 3 goals and put up like 20 shots or 15 shots, something like that. So, data providers are a little bit wonky. So that number may change, but it's not going to change to the degree that's going to say that the U.S. put up 4 XG, maybe closer to 2, a little over 2. The fact of the matter is the U.S. only had 7 shots in the box, which is like basically like a league average, so to say, number for a high-quality side, a below average number of touches in the box. So they were not generating a massive amount of chances, even though the chances that they did create were pretty scintillating.
I think that what you end up with in this game is the U.S., after a couple of pretty sloppy little giveaways in the first 10 or so minutes and opening up the possibilities for a German attack, the U.S. really settled in, and frankly, Trinity Rodman created the slotted pass that Sophia Smith runs onto and is given 0.26 XG, but I suspect might be aired up
she
or corrected
takes it fairly
higher.
Centrally at the edge of the 6-yard area while sprinting onto a flat on the deck pass that comes from some transition play. Generally speaking, that probably should be higher than 0.26.
But it's a very, very high quality chance that gets put away, and that suddenly forces both teams, forces Germany to start chasing the game a little bit and opening up a little bit, which allows the U.S. in turn to open up a little bit. And then suddenly we're having a bizarro track meet between two teams that ostensibly love control.
Yeah. Everybody forgets to play defense until it's time to defend shots. Is sort of how this went.
Yeah,
you know. But interestingly
right.
enough, we had sort of anticipated that. Emma Hayes said that wide attack is something that she was really concerned about and paying attention to from the Germans, which makes sense. Their wingers live to cut in and drop crosses onto Leah Schuller's and Alexandra Pop's heads.
Mm-hmm.
But what that entailed was for Hayes to want to add early pressure and try and press the Germans to win the ball back early so that they could never get into a rhythm of building through the wings. So Sam Coffey and Lindsey Horan were more or less flipped for most of the game, where Coffey was actually playing further forward and often filling like a number 10 space, or, an 8.5 space just behind Mallory Swanson if Mallory Swanson was cutting inside and underneath the forwards, and Rose Lavelle was pushing out wide to combine with Rodman on the right flank. So that meant that if there was a German transition, it was going to be Lindsey Horan's job to try and be the first line of defense.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the chalkboards, the passing chalkboards, there is just a big old space on the U.S.'s right side, the Germans' left side, which should be filled by Emily Fox and a defensive midfielder.
No,
it's not. Because and Leah Schuler and Clara Buell just like pounded that inside left channel for so much of the game.
Yeah, it was a canyon of great joy, the Fox Horan Canyon for the Germans. And I think that to sort of get what you were talking about, I think that I would say that Coffey was in a double pivot. It was just she wasn't the targeted source. Coffey ends up playing dead center of the park for a fair amount of the game, but with none of the responsibility of the drift that Lindsey Horan took on at times and that allowed the U.S. to get dragged out of shape. So there wasn't that continuity between Fox and Horan about who was supposed to be both cutting in and then filling wide a lot of times. And because that continuity wasn't there, you ended up with them either separated or bunched. The passing map indicates that as well. And into that void, the Germans found a lot of joy. That said, a lot of joy, did they? They found a lot of transitional effectiveness, and then they really struggled to attack from there.
Yeah, I mean, there were certain moments where, whether through just sheer fortune or from really heads-up positional discipline and late recovery tackles by Tierna Davidson and Naomi Girma, there were times when it felt threatening and then was nullified at the last moment. So that said, it wasn't as though they were just piling on and piling on and piling on and just really didn't get lucky at the end of the day. I mean, they only had 17 touches in the box. They only had 6 shots in the box. So, like, they were not outperforming the U.S. by any stretch of the imagination. And they were just as defensively open and frail as the U.S. were. I mean, the game that Sophia Smith had in running Katrin Hendrick ragged was really remarkable. And it was the version of Sophia Smith that we all know is the best version of her. You actually made a comment on the live stream of just the thing that you never want when you're a defense is to allow Sophia Smith to dribble into space. And there were so many moments where she had the opportunity to do that.
Smith, who is known for her speed, but not necessarily for her strength, was essentially able to bully Heinrich and frankly every other German defender who had the misfortune of running into her. I think she ended up throwing Hegering to the ground at one point as well. Because the game opened into transition, this is exactly where Sophia Smith can become a terror, and become a terror she did. Mm-hmm. And again, I think the flow of the game sort of suggests the Gwyn goal, which comes, and we could talk about Alyssa Nair, we don't have to. It's nothing we've not already said. But it comes from a long, low hit shot, not particularly tucked away in the corner, but very much against the run of play in the 22nd minute. And then instead of sort of capitalizing on that or trying to reestablish control, the U.S. just go right back down and continue playing the game that they would like to play and finding a Mal Swanson goal in the 26th. And sort of from there, the Germans realize they need to commit forward. Like that, it isn't the first time they concede, which doesn't really change that much about the German approach. It's the second time they concede, at which point they realize they need to start actually throwing bodies forward. And that opens the game up. And then Sophia Smith, on these counters, is able to absolutely brutalize every defender around.
Yeah, again, it's a matter of U.S. trying to make up for lost ground when the Germans do penetrate. And because the Germans are not maintaining any sense of collective organization, those forwards can just punch holes through you over and over and over again. And did. I think the absence of Lena Oberdorf really spoke volumes today in ways that it didn't even in the Australia game, I don't think. Because what space would not have been available to Swanson, to Lavelle, to Coffey when she got forward had Oberdorf been patrolling the center of the park?
No, it's true.
We'll never know, but it seems likely that there would be much less freedom in those central areas for the U.S. to operate in.
And the further the Germans felt the game tilting away from them, and the further they committed numbers forward, the more an Oberdorf actually would have worked as a stabilizing agent, and that it wasn't there really allowed, and who I thought had a pretty excellent game, Rose Lavelle, to really dominate large stretches of the midfield. Rose Lavelle had a unique game, even amongst Rose Lavelle games.
Yeah, not a player necessarily with a reputation for getting stuck in.
Nope.
Someone who maybe we don't always credit with the work rate that she obviously provides on a consistent basis, because you can't be a U.S. women's national team midfielder without it. But given the fact that the U.S. kept getting exposed in transition and there were spaces on those inside channels for the Germans to run into, somebody had to make a recovery run, and go figure, it ended up being Lavelle a lot of the time. And she ended up winning the ball back a not insubstantial amount of those recovery runs. Interestingly, it would be Rodman that you would think among the attacking core who would play that role. And she was tasked, at least in the first half, maybe the first 60 minutes, of staying higher up the field, which you would just assume, because she essentially functions as a wingback even when she's playing as a winger, would be the player to do that, especially when you can see just how much attacking effort is going down the Germans' left side, which would be the side that Rodman was operating on. Which is also why this game, at least defensively, felt, I think, if you're a U.S. fan, frustrating, because it doesn't seem like there was a great deal of communication or organization, which has sort of been the U.S.'s strength under Hayes. They've been, completely shut down. And granted, this is the best opponent that they've faced under the Hayes, so you expect that they were going to get maybe opened up a little bit more than they would against South Korea or Costa Rica or Zambia, obviously. But it, felt a little, I think felt a little bit shambolic. And the reason Lavelle kind of had to play the hero was because of that fact. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is going to repeat, but if you had asked me the area of the pitch that the U.S. was going to have to be really mindful of due to their own weakness, I would not have said their defensive approach.
Me either, but also it's a 0.8 conceded XG over the course of this game against a very dangerous opponent.
Yeah, 0.07 XG per shot.
Yeah.
You'll take that any day of the week. Absolutely.
I think the adjustments need to be made in terms of just communication and positional understanding between Fox, Horan, and Rodman. And less so Rodman, who I think adjusted reasonably well as the game went on. But there were some positioning issues there. And then Lavelle's essentially free roll drift also down the right side created a lot of questions about when do I go, where should I go?
Yeah, well, sort of. And you also have to remember that these players probably aren't going to be doing much training because they only have 2 days off between games. And there's just no time, because the day after you get a game like this, you're doing nothing. You are not. You are going for a walk. That's the amount of physical activity that you're going to be engaging in. And then the day after, you have to be trying to keep yourself as fresh as possible so you have energy for the game. So in training, it'll be pretty light. So whatever work they're able to do is probably going to have to be in the film room.
The flip side of this is they are unlikely to face an opponent until potentially they face Germany again.
In the semifinal.
They are unlikely to face an opponent that will require that kind of activity to monitor flanks.
Well, the way that Brazil and Japan have been playing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we'll talk about that on our bonus episode, which you can listen to if you subscribe to our Patreon for only $6 a month.
But like, no concern there. Okay. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the nature of like luck and XG a little bit, because I think that the Sophia Smith goal is just kind of like why we like XG long term and why it doesn't make a ton of sense in an individual game basis.
Are you talking about Smith's first goal or her second?
No, Smith's first goal is why we like just good chances. Smith's second goal is the goal you sometimes get. The U.S. could have scored that goal against Zambia about 20 times. Like, that could have gone in.
And we're talking about a 44th minute shot outside the box at a slightly acute angle that Opta tags for a .02 XG chance.
The ball takes the world's weirdest ricochet, not only off a defender, but off the post. And with so much English that it is brought into the far corner. And poor Ann Katrinberger. Nothing to be done about that one. But we found ourselves at halftime with the U.S. having generated, over the course of these two fixtures, roughly 6 XG, and having scored 6 goals.
Bingo.
They generated 5 XG against Zambia and only scored 3 goals, and generated roughly an XG against Germany and got 3. This is good finishing luck, typified by this final Smith chance. But if you're going to take your finishing luck, take it against a Germany, not against a Zambia.
I agree. And even to go even further, take your finishing luck against Germany in the Olympics group stage and not Costa Rica in a send-off friendly.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is not a markedly better performance than against Zambia. In some ways, I think it's probably a worse performance. That said...
In ways, yeah.
Yeah. Just in terms of control. That said... When you look at these results, it's your brain wants to say huge result, big win against Germany, kind of disappointing against Zambia. And what the numbers bear out is, no, not exactly that. Some luck here against Germany.
Yep, some bad luck against Zambia, and ultimately it all comes out in the wash.
No, it's just about creating chances and constantly creating chances. And in this game, the U.S. benefited from their constant, even down to the Williams fourth, just the desire to continue creating chances throughout the game and to try to find good shooting spaces. And frankly, they did. And they did a better job of that than Germany. And they were good money for this win.
We could maybe think about the sort of the narrative of the way that this game unfolded was that Germany did have a pretty effective press. Like, they won the ball off the U.S. in their attacking half 30 times.
Yeah.
And they just didn't manage to churn those turnovers into a lot of good shots. So it might not feel quite as significant, but they really laid the power on the U.S. But as a result, they had to sacrifice some organization further back and also keeping their defensive and potentially midfield lines further back to prepare for U.S. counterattacks. So if there is potentially an adjustment or something that the game gave the U.S. or the Germans gave the U.S. that they might have picked up on and adjusted to, it was that. And that allowed them to feel more comfortable opening up and trusting potentially that their back line would clean things up, which they did, even though like there were a few nervy moments where, you know, Davidson and Germa both had to make some pretty last-ditch tackles they wouldn't have had to make if they had been not caught so high upfield, if the Germans hadn't been able to move the ball into such open space so quickly. But they're good enough to be able to still make those tackles and avoid fouling. And that's part of the job.
There's a 15-minute stretch in the first half, the last 15 of the first half. That window, the Germans really were starting to put it together. And it's Smith's third that sort of... very much against the run of play at that point in the game, redirects the focus of the game and puts Germany in a really, really tough place. But I actually thought one of the things that the U.S. did really well defensively. In addition, I mean, Germa and Davidson, and we can get to Davidson's injury and what it means in a second. But Germa and Davidson are forming a really lovely partnership. I actually thought they did a nice job of making sure that Nuskin and Scholler couldn't connect with one another once the Germans were in their sort of attacking phase of play. They really isolated the two forwards. And some of that is Nuskin not having a particularly good game, but I just felt
and not being a natural forward.
Yeah, not being a natural forward, fine. But
your natural number 9 is playing at the number 6, and your number 6/number 8 is playing at the number 9.
Yeah, baffling.
Make that what you will.
Baffling in its own right, and it results in a very bad game from Nuskin and an injured Pop going off, being in a position that's unnatural. That said, there just wasn't a lot of cohesion in the German attack, and I think some of that needs to be credited to Davidson and then Sonnet and Germa.
Yeah, and if we want to talk about what it means, we don't know the severity of Davidson's injury just yet, and we don't know if she's potentially available for Australia on Wednesday. But I think Hayes, if I were to put money on it, is going to, out of an abundance of caution, do a heavy amount of rotation. Yep. And any player who might be an injury risk or have recently been carrying a knock is going to get the bench. And so I think we'll see Sonnet line up along with Germa against Australia. And if Davidson has to be out even longer during the knockout stage, Sonnet is a pretty good bet to cover that space amply. Although she did get caught high up a couple of times in the second half and got dribbled past. So you don't love that. But that's also just sort of how the game was unfolding, and it was happening to everybody. So I'm not going to pin that on Sonnet's lack of skill. So, she's a incredible positional defender.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to actually have to probably do that much positional defending against Australia. So I think it's sort of the one area actually where I don't think the U.S. is going to have to worry if they've lost one of their starting players.
Yeah, and they have Sams in reserve, who I believe is eligible to see action against Australia if Davidson is quote unquote ruled out.
Yeah, that's how the alternate rules are working this year, where like you can just it's like the IL. You can just take players off the 18 and put an alternate on, and so that's a very real possibility.
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see Emily Sams get 90 against Australia, just given the nature of this group at this point. Do we want to talk about like little rooms for critique that we saw out of the second half? Because I have a couple little bugaboos, I suppose.
Tell me your bugaboos.
Not using your substitutions. Emma Hayes.
We're back in sub discourse the way we were last summer.
Yeah, Emma Hayes brings on, Emily Sonnet out of necessity right before halftime, and then doesn't make a sub again until Lynn Williams, who comes on and bags a goal.
But that's the 84th, 85th minute.
85th minute. And then we get, and potentially an injured Trinity Rodman, who looked not good going off the pitch in the 90th +2, and Casey Kruger on. Justify to me, where's your head about these subs? You don't have to justify it, but what was your thinking here?
Well, I mean, the subs that she did make made sense, I mean,
agreed.
Williams is such a strong and versatile forward that if you're looking for a goal, she's a good option. And they weren't looking for a goal, and she still managed to score on a really wonderful counterattack. So no problem there. No problem with Sonnet. Sonnet is obviously the next player up on the depth chart at center back. I don't know how I feel about the lack of subs beyond that. There was obviously a lot of sub discourse last year. I, along with everybody else at the time, felt very strongly that Vlatko Andonovski was making a mistake in keeping his powder dry with substitutions the further the tournament went. Tony Gustafsson also came in for some criticism for that. And then, of course, Serena Wiegman came in for praise for not substituting a lot because, her team expressed such cohesion and such togetherness as a group. But what's the difference? Oh yeah, England made the final,
Mm-hmm.
and Australia made the bronze medal game, and the U.S. crashed out. So Gustafsson claims that there is data to support the idea that in knockout tournaments that semifinalists tend to not make a lot of substitutions, and the thinking going basically the way that you would justify Wiegmann's approach to it with England, that you need the group to be able to build rhythm, to build cohesion as the tournament goes in order to be successful. I looked at this a while ago, and there's probably better tests that you can do than what I did, but I just looked at all the semifinalists and the percentage of available subs that they used in those tournaments. And I didn't really see a there. Like, some teams are successful and used all their subs, and vice versa. Some teams were not very successful and didn't use subs at all, and vice versa. So I don't know if I have a strong feeling about it. If I were to guess, this has seemed like Hayes' preferred 11 these first two games before, the injury substitutions. I would think that she wants that group available for the knockout stages.
Mm-hmm.
You get 2 days off between games, and Australia has demonstrated that they have a very soft underbelly, and all you need is a draw in order to win the group. So if I were to guess, I think that it's not just going to be rotations on Wednesday. It's going to be heavy rotations, and a bunch of starters are just going to get the day off.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And with the objective of trying to make sure that they are fresh when the games really, really start to matter. So before that happens, my guess is that she's just doing as much as she can to build up that rhythm with her starters. So that's why she wanted to keep them on the field longer than you would think she would do. But I'm guessing. I can't say that I have any inside information on that fact. But from the outside, if you were to say that there is a good reason for her not to sub, I would think it would be that.
For me, it is, and it's situational, and it's a lot player by player. Like Rose Lavelle, who just deals with muscle injuries and knocks all the time. I was surprised she went the distance.
Yeah.
I was surprised that, either Smith or Swanson wasn't taken off significantly earlier to give Lynn Williams a slightly longer run. I was surprised that we didn't see these subs sooner, just to manage workload. I was surprised to see Sam Coffey go the distance with a yellow card in this game when Corbin Albert was on the bench. That's who I meant to test. Despite the fact that we all detest Corbin Albert, I didn't understand why, if you have a Corbin Albert and your team is up 3-1.
That's fair. And I think also, we're two of the biggest Sam Coffey stands on the planet. I didn't think she had a particularly great game.
There seemed to be a measure of German respect about just not passing it into Sam Coffey land. Because boy, did they not attempt to play the ball through Sam Coffey. And in turn, that meant she had like a pretty light day at the office.
It's not even that. It's that there were a couple of times where she had the ball taken off of her, where she got dribbled past and she had to make kind of an awkward recovery run. Just didn't seem I didn't see the smooth kind of level of play from her that you normally see.
Totally. She was only dribbled past once in the 90, but I take your point here, which is to say she was funneled around.
Yeah.
But, sort of given that, she blocked 2 shots. She was 29 for 30 passing.
Yeah,
with a lot of
that's crazy.
Yeah, with a lot of vertical ball play. But also she was a little bit out of the game as far as like it just wasn't a big contribution game from her, all things considered.
To give her credit is that with Hayes moving her further forward, she had different tactical responsibilities than she normally has.
Totally.
So she's not there to be the shield. She's not there to be the destroyer necessarily. Or at least that's not her primary objective when the team is playing in the defensive half. So that requires adjustment. And again, Haran looked defensively frail at times. And that, I think, I just wonder if, if the positions were flipped and Coffey was playing deeper and Haran was pushed up, maybe those pockets would not have been exposed by Germany in the way that they were. But that's, again, Hayes making a tactical decision because she wants to be front foot and not let the Germans be comfortable playing out of the back.
Fair.
So
No,
it's a gamble. You rolled the dice. I wouldn't say necessarily that you rolled a 7, but you didn't roll snake eyes either.
And in this game, so many things went right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we finally are seeing the Smith-Swanson spacing correct itself.
Yeah.
It was my minorest bugaboo, but now that that's there, the front three is able and firing. You're continuing to see a lot of really good chance creation. Generally speaking, I'm happy about not only this result, but the sort of the early days of the Emma Hayes era in terms of on-field performance. This is another consummate win, and the first time the U.S. has conceded, and frankly, they conceded from a bomb shot that I think Jane Campbell gets to.
And also, I mean, again, think about the path. We'll talk about Brazil and Japan in the bonus episode, but they do not offer the same amount of transitional danger, I don't think. Even though that's what they both want to do, I have not seen that level of transitional quality from either of them, which means that risk is mitigated in the quarterfinal, provided that the U.S. wins. And then in the semifinal, if you face Germany again, well, you kind of know what Germany's all about.
Yep.
So you can feel a little bit better about that too. So the team, for whatever nitpicks we're making here, they're set up pretty well in their path to the final.
They are clicking along. It's going reasonably well. And they're playing pretty attractive, easy on the eyes soccer to watch.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's kind of like the good old days are here again.
As we said, they only need 1 point from the game against Australia in order to win the group. Let's talk about what we saw against Australia against Zambia. I mean, this was one of the most insane games I've ever seen.
I've only watched the highlights, by the way.
Everybody just forgot how to defend set pieces.
It was like an all-star game. Yep.
Most of those goals came from that poor Ngomi Musongo. Like, she just let a free kick slip through her hands that she should have caught easily, and it went for a goal. Your heart breaks. It was a total mess. And all comes from everything we've talked about, the disaster, the monstrousness that is Bruce Mwape and the Zambian, the FAZ, the Football Association of Zambia. These players, in a funny way, I thought to myself while watching the game that Zambia is clearly not good enough for this level, and I wonder, this isn't actually true, but it does make you wonder, it's like, are Banda and Kundananji actually kind of holding up their development as a program more generally, because those players are so good that it got them 2 consecutive Olympics berths and a World Cup berth. But then because everybody else is not up to their standard, they get pretty brutalized. And I'm, by the way, not going to let Australia off the hook, because they were just as shambolic on a lot of set pieces that allowed for Zambia to score the goals that they scored. Mackenzie Arnold on, I think it's goal number 3, she should know better,
Yeah.
Like, Musonga doesn't have the training environment to allow her to become a really international caliber goalkeeper, and that's not her fault. Mackenzie Arnold gets to play in the Australian setup, and she currently plays for West Ham, which, doesn't put as much money into its women's team as, if she played for Chelsea or Arsenal. But, like, it's a professional setup.
And she's going to Portland to become keeper number 12.
And she's going to Portland, who, have no issues with their goalkeeping right now.
Oh,
so that is really incredible how rough Australia looked defensively on a lot of those goals.
Yeah, I think this Australia team is underperforming at this tournament.
They're a fucking mess.
They're a mess. And poor Zambia for not getting a result. Let's talk what the 11 looks like against Australia.
Yeah, again, heavy rotation, so I think you're probably going to see Casey Kruger come in at left back.
Yeah, I think you're gonna see Casey Murphy maybe get some reps at goal.
I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Sonnet obviously at center back.
Sams, you let Davidson go, not even hit the bench.
So you think Sams comes in at center back and Sonnet plays the 6?
No,
or do you think it's Sonnet and Sams and you let Germa rest?
Yeah, that's the one. I think that's not out of the realm of possibility. I suspect that the actual answer is it's Sonnet and Germa with Sams ready to go take 45 minutes if this game is over at halftime.
I think that's well said. Again, they're only looking for a draw, so it could be a horrible 0-0 kind of draw.
Yep.
Corbin Albert's coming in.
Yep, for sure. Probably to play the 6 for Sam Coffey.
Yeah, and then the question becomes, do you bench Haran, and then you're obviously going to bench Lavelle.
Yeah.
So who comes in for Haran? Where do they play?
You might do 40. You might do 45 of Haran and 45 of Lavelle on for Haran.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What else? Do
you bring Shaw on? If she's available?
I mean, she's really not been available, so yeah. Huge question mark. Obviously, if she is, you do.
You bring it up because what we're sort of getting at with regard to the midfield is like Albert question mark at the 8, and then you got to put somebody at the 10. Maybe you have Haran and Lavelle split the halves at the 10.
Yeah,
then you need to put somebody at the 8. So, when it's Lavelle in the game, who plays behind? And if Albert's already there, I don't know. Maybe you give Coffey a half.
Maybe this is where we see Crystal Dunn hit a midfield spot. I don't.
Very possibly. And it's what we're all kind of dancing around is that like some of these problems, if Shaw is not available to go, could maybe be mitigated a bit if Croy Bethune was available. But the way that Emma Hayes has been speaking about Bethune recently suggests that in training, Bethune has not seemed quite up to scratch. And Hayes isn't quite prepared to have her play, which is wild because it was Hayes who brought Bethune into the setup in the first place, took her as an alternate when she had not even been capped before, and has been running away with the NWSL Rookie of the Year award and is going to get MVP votes. So what is going wrong in training? And I know that's maybe a little bit harsh as to what Hayes is actually trying to communicate, but what could be happening behind the scenes where you don't feel comfortable bringing Bethune in?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, regardless here, this is a game where I'd like to see Croy Bethune get a lot of minutes. I don't think it's likely, but it feels right laid out there properly for that. Like Trinity Rodman has been essentially maxed out. If the little knock she took at the end of the game is anything, I don't want to see it. Yeah, don't risk it.
Yeah, Lynn Williams will start in this scenario. So if she comes in for Rodman, maybe what you have to do is, it feels like just because of the options available that somebody is going to have to go 90 who's already gone 90.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if you bring Shaw in, Shaw feels like a Swanson replacement to me.
Yep.
And then, does Smith stay on? I mean, like, we don't have a lot of forwards.
No,
that's the funny thing. Like, they're so elite, and yet there are not a lot of backups behind them.
No, and you can only carry so many players to this tournament, but I think it raises some interesting issues about how one rotates here. Just wanted to tease that out because I actually don't have good answers for this. That said, I'd love to see the bench maximized as much as is possible for why else win your first 2 group games but to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, like if the game's well in hand at the half, then there's really no need to have any attacking midfielders on the field.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, so yeah, interesting things await. Australia, what do you have any theories about why they're so bad right now?
Injuries,
especially defensively.
It's not a theory. Injuries. They are missing.
Well, but that's not true. I mean, their back line is healthy. Their back line is playing.
Our perception of them, and I talked about this going into the tournament, is a little bit inflated by what happened last summer. I think this team simply isn't that good and is susceptible to everybody's fears about what Zambia could do to the USA. They became susceptible. Like, Australia suffered that indignity.
Well, I think also that
Gustafsson
is sort of he's playing with one hand tied behind his back because I don't think it's good practice to be keeping Courtney Vine on the bench with the speed that we know that she possesses and her ability to get in behind. And you keep playing Michelle Heyman in front of her and bringing Emily Van Egmond into the team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for me, Emily Van Egmond is break glass in case of emergency at this stage of the Australian national team. And she keeps getting tons and tons of minutes. And I remember during the tournament last year, and he came under a lot of scrutiny for this because they were the host nation, but some of Gustafsson's decisions are unorthodox, and then he doesn't really explain himself until after the game, and even then he doesn't always do it. So yeah, like when you're playing Emily Van Egmond essentially like as a support striker behind Mary Fowler, would you really think you're going to get a lot of fluidity out of that? Because Fowler has been such an inconsistent player in her years with both Australia and as a pro that she can never really get herself entrenched in Manchester City. And she's young and things can change, but I think he's got other cards. He's got good cards and he's just not playing them. And it keeps not working, like.
That said, I suspect the U.S. goes out and beats Australia potentially quite badly.
It's possible. And again, they might not even be thinking about that because all they got to do is get a point.
By quite badly, I mean like 2 or 3-0, which feels very in range for what the U.S. is sort of creating at this point against opposition.
But all of that is going down at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on Wednesday. We will be watching. Hope you guys will be watching too. For our Patreon members, we'll be hanging out in our Discord server talking about all the ins and the outs. And if you are not a Patreon member, it's only $6 a month. It's pretty fun. You get all of our bonus episodes and access to our Discord and invitations to our members-only live watch-alongs. We'll be doing 1 or 2 more of those during the knockout stages. Mm-hmm. So go to patreon.com/XOwnGoals. Oh, that's the letter X own goals to sign up today and get all of the fun content that we are going to provide you.
Join the crew. Everyone's super fun on there.
It's a great crew. We got to shout out.
I'm really impressed.
Yeah, got to shout out Christina. Got to shout out Kimberly, Emily. God, I know I'm forgetting a bunch of people. It was a good group.
Yeah,
Steve. Yep. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of you guys. You guys were awesome.
I'm really blown away by how much I'm enjoying this Discord and the conversations that are going on there, and how much the community. It's the community I think we were all hoping and searching for, and I'm really glad that it can happen here. So thanks to everybody who
couldn't do it without you.
Thanks to everybody who signed up, and welcome to anybody who is curious.
And until Thursday, have a good week.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.